I'm curious today if any of you have ever had a loan that was paid off by someone else, and not like your parents, that was paid off by a third party that was not like connected to you. One. All right. So when I graduated seminary in 2010, I had one small student loan that was interest-free. It was about $2,500. These days, seminary debt is a bit of a crisis for clergy, and as debt goes, that was really almost zero. So scale-wise, it wasn't terrible, but for the first several years as a pastor, I was paying on that thing $75 a month every month. Now, my senior year in seminary, I had opportunity to preach at St. John Lutheran Church in Philo, Ohio. It had been a number of years since they could afford a pastor, so they had seminary students come out and serve for whole years at a time, and I was the 6th or 7th year that had been going on. Before I had gotten there, St. John's a beautiful little small-town church building, and each of those stained glass windows comes from the Gospel of John. And when they had to make the building handicapped accessible, they had to take one of the windows in the back out. And when I was there was a lot of conversation about taking that glass and doing something new with it, and it was a stained glass window project they were going to do. Well, a few years ago, I got a package in the mail, and in it was a little cross, stained glass cross that they had made, some as part of that project, and sent them out to those of us that had served there. And then there was a note, and the note said, "We are paying off the rest of your student loan." What a wonderful surprise of grace that was. It wasn't a huge, I think we maybe owed $800 still, but there was now $75 a month that we got back that we did not have to worry about paying on this debt, and it was this great freeing thing. They did not owe that to us. There was no reason for them to do that other than just graciousness and love, and it was just this great surprise. In our gospel story today, we have two people that owe a wealthy man oil and wheat, and the wealthy man's manager forgives not all, but some of that debt. And there may have been some level of excitement for them in that having their debts reduced like that. And I wish that's perhaps where the story ended, and it was this great joyous sense of debts that were forgiven. However, that's not how the story goes. It starts with this wealthy man who's got a manager, and the manager apparently is incompetent and squandering the wealthy man's property. So he calls him to account for that and tells him that he's fired. Now, there must have been some time of doing some paperwork to get the firing done, because when he goes to these two debtors, he said, "Before I'm fully dismissed, quick sit down," and he reduces their debt. Why? Because he's hoping those people will take care of him later. Now, where you expect this story to go is that the manager will have to now come before the wealthy man who says, "You were not authorized to do that." You can imagine him even calling the debtors in and saying, "He wasn't allowed to do that. Your debt is still what it was before." Maybe even calling in the authorities. But none of that happens. Instead, he commends him for being shrewd. And you kind of wonder, well, why would that be? Well, maybe the manager's going to get something out of this, but those people still owe him, right? They still owe the wealthy man, and now they maybe even owe him more than just money, because there's some sense of obligation that these debts have been reduced, even if it was at the hand of the manager. Maybe that's part of it. But then Jesus keeps talking. And he talks about making friends with dishonest wealth. And he talks about being faithful with dishonest wealth. And that's how you can then maybe be entrusted with true riches. And he just keeps bringing all of these comments in there about this dishonest wealth and this faithfulness and shrewdness. And he says the children of the light aren't shrewd in the world, but the people of today are. And all of it is just very confusing to me. And then you get to the end, and it seems to just out of nowhere come and say you cannot serve God and wealth. And I think that may be a bit of a clue as to how we can start to understand this story. It's a parable. Parables that Jesus tells are often metaphors, and they're not meant to be like factual, true stories about things. And so when we hear parables, it's easy to take them in a metaphorical sense, to say, okay, well, maybe the money isn't really financial debt. Maybe it's the debt of guilt, or the debt of favors that we owe people, or something like that we can call a debt that we carry. But when he ends it by saying you cannot serve God and wealth, that puts it in a very particular place of debt. They had debtors' prisons. They had people, including, these two in the story, people were in debt all the time. And so I wonder if the story isn't really much more about the actual ways that people land in that kind of debt. And if we look at the story then in that light, it can maybe begin to make sense. Because the man is wealthy, and the manager serves him, what does he serve? wealth. You cannot serve God and wealth, so he serves wealth. When he's fired, he no longer serves wealth. You can imagine that while he was serving wealth, he had some certain level of expectations or fears or anxieties about that. There's another time where we hear about the coins, and the master that gives the coins to the people and comes back and says, what did you do with them? And the one buried it, and that's the one that gets in trouble because they squandered the opportunities of wealth. That may be this kind of manager. He was perhaps afraid and squandered opportunities and squandered the money. While he was serving wealth, he did not do it well. But once he's dismissed, he no longer is serving wealth. And once he's not serving wealth, he starts getting creative. Now, the reason he gets creative is because he's worried about himself and how he's going to live and survive. But then he starts to forgive debts. And as the story goes on, it talks about faithfulness. Faithfulness. Faithful a little, faithful in much. Well, faithfulness seems to have two bits to it. One is in the canceling of debt, the literal canceling of debt. The other, Jesus says, make friends with dishonest wealth. The manager's not wealthy, which implies to me that the wealth that the rich guy has is dishonest. But the manager is dishonest with the way he goes about trying to take care of himself. So there's a lot of dishonesty floating around in this story. And Jesus tells us to go make friends dishonestly with the dishonest wealth so that we can do that. So aside from setting it aside and canceling debts, there seems to be something in this story about building relationships in ways that perhaps help us to carry good news with us. Now there's a particular part of this story where he's commended for being shrewd. And he says people of this generation are shrewd in the world in a way that people of the light are not. And what I think that's getting at is that we all know what street smarts are, right? People with street smarts know how to get by out in the world, and then we know that there are other people that are maybe really bright, but they don't have any common sense, and we worry about them out in the world. Perhaps children of the light that are fully holy and righteous, people that really live in that light of God all the time, don't have the street smarts and the common sense to live well out in the world. And so the shrewdness is perhaps that if this good news that we carry with us from God is to connect with people, we have to know how to connect with them. We have to build relationships with them. We have to have street smarts to be able to know how to function amongst all the dishonesty in the world so that we can live in that place. And perhaps that is why Jesus says, go make friends with dishonest wealth. Now, there are different ways of understanding how the church lives in the world. There are some strands of Christianity that thinks church culture ought to be just completely separate. So you think about like the Amish who live in separate communities, distanced from the rest of the culture around them in a lot of ways. There are other strands of Christianity that would say that the culture ought to be ruled by the church. And so we ought to have a theocracy where Christian beliefs and Christian values are the thing that rule the day. As Lutherans, our understanding is that God can be at work in the culture, and that we are called to go be present in the culture with the good news that we've been given to share. And so to understand that we are to make friends with dishonest wealth is perhaps a way of looking at our Lutheran understanding of the world, that we go out into a culture that in many ways has a lot of dishonesty around it, and that we build relationships so that we can carry the grace and love that we've been given to share. So if we think about the story in that way, how might it speak to us? If you have a manager who is faithful when he cancels debts and builds relationships out of the dishonesty of the world, that's what faithfulness looks like. How does that speak to us? We live in a modern capitalistic system, and in our modern capitalistic system, it is dominated by large companies. And what is the goal of large companies? Make money. Profit has become the only goal. I don't know that it was always that way, but it is that way now. And so when you think about, we just had to get a new water heater. The guy told us it would last how long? 10 years? The last one lasted 24 years, right? They don't make them like that anymore. Why? Well, if you can sell it cheaper and it doesn't last as long, you can sell another one later and you can make more money. There's a lot of conversation right now in our politics about jobs that are outsourced. If profit is your only motive, what are you going to do with your labor? Get it where it's cheapest, right? So all the promises of government, get jobs, do jobs, none of that's going to happen because profit is the only motive, and if profit is the only motive, labor is going to go where it's cheapest. And so you can look at the ways that we live in this culture. If you work, and most of us work, right? And if you're retired, there's all different ways. But we, in many, many ways, unconsciously are serving profit. The manager in the story, I don't think, consciously understands that he's not serving God and is serving wealth. And I don't know that we consciously understand it, but if we work in the business world, we are in some way, shape, or form serving wealth. And I thought about this week, I thought, well, teachers don't do that though. But our education system has been driving people to study what things? Science, technology, engineering, and math. Why? So they can serve the money, right? So they can be a cog in an economic wheel so we can continue to serve profit. Do any of you have debt? Probably. That's serving somebody's profit, right? When we go shop, somewhere where you could just talk about all the ways that we live, and there are so many ways that we are just wrapped up in serving wealth, and we don't even consciously know it. So if we listen to this story and say, well, then what are we supposed to do? Well, the manager is faithful when he cancels debts and builds relationships in the dishonesty of the culture around him. And we can go perhaps and try to do those things. Now, most of us probably don't manage debt that we can cancel. And if you did cancel it, you'd probably get fired. So that may not be the most practical thing. But perhaps, as a congregation, we could hear this story and say, maybe God's calling us to figure out how to cancel debt. Literally. There are people who are just burdened by debt. It keeps them from getting a home of their own, or it keeps them from sending their kids to college, or just keeps them from having food on the table day to day, whatever that is. And it could be that as a congregation we could discern that there are ways that we can use our collective resources to go out and free people from that debt so that they can live in more whole and well ways. Maybe that's a conversation for the longer term, but we also can then go build relationships out in the world, in the places that we are, whether that's at work or whether we're teaching or whether you're working at the hospital or whether you're retired. There are ways that we can wake up every day and say, okay, we live in a culture that's filled with a lot of dishonest wealth, and I can unconsciously serve that, or I can ask the question every day and say, how do I serve God today? And how do I serve God today has all kinds of answers, but it's not something we necessarily get our minds around unless we think about that as a question. So whatever you do for work, there are parts of it that will serve profit whether you do it well or not. But there are also parts of it where you can serve God along the way as you go. And when you're retired, you can serve God. And when you're teaching, you can serve God. And when you're a student, you can serve God. And I think it's into this culture that we are called to go do that. Not to sit here in the church and build walls around it and say, we're going to serve God, but to go out into the hard places and serve God there. Now, Jesus tells us you cannot serve God and wealth, and I think there may be some very literal stuff to this parable about freeing people from debt. But there's also a statement in here that says, if you cannot be trusted with dishonest wealth, then you cannot be trusted with true riches. And there I think Jesus does take this parable and take it to a metaphorical place, because the true riches that Jesus talks about is certainly not cash, right? The true riches is what Jesus gifts to us. When he came into this world as a human being, he came to live amongst the profit place. He came to live in a place of dishonest wealth. And when he challenged all of the ways that that system worked, he got hung on a cross for it. And on that cross, he took with him that dishonesty. He took with him that profit motive. He took with him all of that so that he could be raised new and free us from it. And in that, freedom from that is where we get the true riches. And we can talk about those true riches in lots of ways. We can talk about love for our neighbor. We can talk about peace. We can talk about joy, hope, faith, forgiveness, mercy. It's like in the resurrection, Jesus has given us a toolbox of all of these things that we can then carry into the world to share the freedom that we have been given. So as we go to do that, that may be what the true riches are that we share. Maybe we can cancel some debts. We certainly can ask every day, how is it that we can serve God? But all of that we can only do because Jesus has already freed us from having to serve profit, having to take care of ourselves, having to look out for ourselves, and we then instead can serve others. Now, one of my favorite parts about this story is that it starts off with a manager who's dishonest in the way he cancels debt. And we have to be careful here, because I don't necessarily believe that the ends always justify the means. That it doesn't matter how you get the debt canceled, as long as you get it canceled. Rather, I think this manager is on a journey. If you think about the ways that we grow in faith, we don't always start off with the purest of motives. Sometimes we give offerings because we feel guilty if we don't. Hopefully that generosity begins to shape us, and we begin then to give because it feels like we ought to do it. Maybe not out of guilt, but just out of a sense of duty. And if we keep doing that and keep being generous, sooner or later we get to a point where we give just because that's who we are. We've become generous people. This dishonest manager cancels debts. Why? Because it's good for him. But maybe in that experience of seeing what that did to those people, it started to shape him to have a more generous spirit generally. Not just with debts, but generous with people's time, and generous in making space for people. When we come to the space to worship, sometimes it may be because it makes us feel good. But hopefully over time it shapes us to be that we do this just because that's who we are. And that, I think, is how God works. When that debt was paid off for us, when that loan was paid off for us, we couldn't have afforded to pay it all off right on our own. But that freedom gave us an opportunity to go out into the world with a different set of resources, and it was a joyous thing. Jesus has already paid a debt for us. We could not pay God back for everything we have. We never could. We can't make ourselves right with God. We can't get ourselves to God. Jesus has done that. Every day that we can ask, how do I serve God today, is just a step that we take in being grown into people who don't have to ask the question anymore because we just serve God because that's who we are. Amen.